order or
No,
seeking
Mr.
a
Chairman,
call?
I'm seeking a call.
Sir William Sear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's regrettable that people have found the box offensive. For me, in my eyes, they are symbolic of life and death issues that this bill relates to. So I want to, firstly, because Part 3 is the substantive part, it's also the part that has direct impact on workers and their lives. I want to firstly make a couple of general comments. Then I want to respond and challenge some comments that were made by two ministers relating to this bill in Part 3. And then I want to go through and show, particularly the Honourable Peter Dunn, why I think he's wrong when he says that this bill has not been diluted. The first comment I want to make generally, sir, is in the words of Denise McMillan, whose husband died killed in the forestry industry. She said, if you, speaking to this government, if you pass this bill, I ask you, come and explain to my daughter.
If those two members want to have a long-distance discussion, they can go to each end of one of the lobbies.
Mr. Chairman, again, I want to repeat, and I hope you don't take my time for it. Debbie McMillan, whose husband died, was killed in the forestry industry, said, saying to the government, if you pass this bill, I ask you to come and explain to my daughter why her dad's death meant absolutely nothing. She also says to the government, when she heard the government saying it was important to keep the right balance in the legislation, she says to the government, are you saying that a certain number of deaths is acceptable as long as you have that balance? The other general statement I say is in the words of Bernie Monk, the father whose son, Michael, died at the Pike River, said the health and safety provisions in the bill should not be watered down for small businesses. And he quotes, one rule and one rule for everyone. Those are the general comments, sir, that preface my comments now. I want to challenge the comments made by Minister Dunn when he says that this bill is much stronger now and has not been watered down. And I will show, sir, through my analysis of clauses 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, why I think the minister is wrong. And the first point I want to say why he's wrong is really using the words of Michael Woodhouse, the minister last night, when he introduced this part, and he said that because Part 1 and Part 2, there was general consensus that, and Part 3 is the substantive part that there would be dispute about it, that he suggested to us that on balance, that the legislation is still good legislation. But I want to give you an example why this part actually makes the entire legislation bad legislation. Imagine, sir, if the minister is sitting at the table eating a bowl of soup or cereal, whatever it is in the morning, and a fly happens to come along and plonks himself or herself in that bowl of cereal. Would you say then on balance that that bowl of cereal is still good cereal? And if you imagine that that fly had been flying about in the pigsty or in the cow paddock, would you still think that on balance that porridge, bowl of porridge is still good legislation? I say no. That's the argument I want to present to the Minister and Mr. Peter Dunn. I now want to refer you, sir, to clause 61, duty to engage with workers. And although the legislation uses the acronyms PCBU, which is quite long and tongue-tied, let me just use business for the sake of that. In subpart 1, it says, a PCBU or business must, so far as reasonably practical, engage with workers. So if you remove so far as reasonably practical, the subclause should say, a business must engage with workers. But when the government adds on so far as practical, reasonably practical next to must, it removes the strength of that word must. Therefore, sir, I say to Peter Dunn and the Minister that they're wrong because the use of those two words next to each other actually weakens that particular clause. If I refer to Minister to page 5 of the regulatory impact statement, it will read for the sake of this House, and I quote, small businesses and self-employed workers will need to engage more actively with health and safety requirements than they did under the present legislation. So the way that that subclause has been worded by using a compulsive term, must, and then putting another statement so far as reasonably practical, makes that whole piece of that clause there irrelevant. It does, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
William Seo.
Mr. Speaker. And so this is why you have the voices of the past, or the voices of families who came to Parliament, say that this piece of legislation has been watered down. Let me go to part 2. It says, if the PCBU or business and the workers have agreed to procedures for engagement, engagement must be in accordance with those procedures. So the use of the word if suggests that it may or may not happen. And if the use of the word if is there, again, sir, this is an example of why this legislation is not as strong as it was originally recommended. It's actually weakening it. The words that could have been there, sir, should be words that would require the engagement, that would insist on the engagement. But instead, we have the word if to begin that particular clause on. I want to also look at clause 4, subpart B, for any other person to a fine not exceeding 100,000. So the fine suggests that this fine is going to prevent something from happening. But the reality is, sir, because of the word if at the very top, there is no compulsion. So the government uses the huge fine of 100,000 as if that would deter some wrongdoing. But the reality is, because of the word if at the beginning, nothing is going to happen anyway. So it's quite deceptive, sir, in that particular clause. 62, the nature of engagement. So in A, you have the word timely manner. In B, you have the words reasonable opportunity. I asked the government to explain, when they put in their engagement with workers under this subpart requires relevant information about the matter be shared with workers in a timely manner, when will that be? Will it be today? Will it be tomorrow? Will it be in a week's time? Will it be in a month's time? Or will it be in a year? The words that should have been there should have been immediately. If we are talking about the lives, hush, if we are talking about the lives of New Zealanders, sir, remember the symbol of people who have died. If we're talking about the lives, then we shouldn't be waiting around. Our action should be immediately. And because of the word if that's been used consistently throughout this part 3, it suggests nothing is going to happen. And that's a sad indictment on this particular government. And I remind, sir, the words that I began with, the general words of why the public out there do not believe that because this part here is bad, that on balance you have good legislation. I remind you about the fly sitting on the porridge bowl. The words about reasonable opportunities, that workers be given reasonable opportunities to express their views. So in the workplace, we have a bicultural society, but we also have a workforce that is diverse culturally, language-wise, and to expect that workers in a power situation where some may fear the employer, some may not be willing to reveal what is in their mind to an employer, giving workers reasonable opportunity could mean nothing. Could mean nothing happens. And that puts workers in danger. So the words again, again we see in part 2 of 64, again it says, if the workers are represented by a health and safety representative, the engagement must involve that representative. Again, by the use of the word if, sir, it suggests that there may not be health and safety representatives. What then happens to that group of workers, irrespective of whether there are 20 or less? So it's been suggested by some members of this House that this is a safe environment. Yet I remember 3 occasions. First occasion is when somebody was about to jump out of this ceiling here. Is this a safe environment? But yet somebody was prepared to jump down from that here, and I and others were sitting back here. Second thing is, I had a group of workers who were locked up in the lift in the beehive, and for about 4 or 5 hours we were locked in there. The staff here did not know how to open it up. In fact, somebody else had to come in. The 3 women that were locked up with me in that lift were afraid, and one of them got sick. Now, we were ill prepared for that. The third incident, sir, is myself tripping over on a group of stairs and hurt my ankle. What I'm saying, sir, we think this is a safe environment, but nobody plans on accidents, and therefore this is...
I call Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr.